Yeah.
Yep, all good.
Right, sorry for that little technical mishap there, but yeah, we'll kick things off now. So yeah, I'm going to be talking today about the power of language and how we can utilise language research in our movement. So just a bit of housekeeping before we get going. If you like to change your chat name to your name or nickname, locations and pronouns, if you'd like to, you can. If you haven't already, drop us a check-in in the chat, letting us know how you're doing. And yeah, keep your mics muted if you're not speaking, please, just to stop us having any background noise. And yeah, we're going to have some space at the end for questions and discussion on everything that we cover. So yeah, if you do have any questions or anything, like, rest assured we'll get the chance to go through them. And we're going to have a breakout room activity at the end. But there's no pressure to join this, and if you don't want to join a breakout room, then just like don't enter it. Or if you get put in a breakout room, you can just keep your mic and camera off and you don't have to engage if you don't feel comfortable. But yeah, if you do, it'd be really great for us to get some discussion going, and then yeah, we'll come back together at the end for a discussion. So we're going to be covering a bit of an introduction to sociolinguistics for anybody that's like new to the area. We're going to be going through some relevant theories in sociolinguistics that I think we can apply to our messaging. We're going to be looking at the use of dialect and language more broadly in public health, political and marketing campaigns, and the impact of particular messengers and the importance of having messages with various like regional accents and representing different communities, and then wrapping it up with how we can utilise this in our messaging. And some of the things that we're currently working on, we'll be letting you know about in case anybody wants to get more involved in this, if you become inspired to work on linguistics and animal rebellion after this talk. So, sociolinguistics. The main things that we focus on in sociolinguistics, which tell us stuff about language, are dialect, which is the differences in the way that people use specific items of vocabulary. And we're often interested in what's called the vernacular. And the vernacular is like the speech of everyday people, so not just like formal registers of language, but also like all registers and all types of language that you might use in different contexts. And accent, which is the way that people pronounce particular speech sounds. And I'm going to kick off the workshop by starting a bit of a debate, because anyone who's in the UK at the minute will know that like one of the most controversial things is the name for this piece of bread. So I'm going to invite you to put a message in the chat letting us know what you would call this piece of bread. And this is just a little exercise to give us some idea of the different types of variation of the use of names for things. So what have we got? Bun, roll back, farm cake. And I'm going to throw in there the one that's popular where I'm from in Sheffield. We call this a bread cake. Butter. So as you can see, like even just one like trivial thing like a bread cake, because I'm going to stick to that. That's what I'll call it. Can actually like have like so much variation and can spark so much conversation. And linguistics always joke about if you ever want to like start World War III in a group of people in the UK, just ask them what this thing's called, because there's so much like variation in like the use of language to mean different things. And also I've put a picture of a bath here because this is something that really demonstrates accent variation in the UK. There's quite a lot of difference in the way that words are pronounced depending on what region in the UK you reside. And in the north, you'll get people saying bath, and in the south, people often say bath. Yeah, so we've got some debate going on in the chat about that. So yeah, like not only are the words that we use to describe things like rife in variation, also the way that we pronounce things can vary quite a lot as well. So one of the main concepts in sociolinguistics is that language is socially stratified by lots of social factors, which include location, like as I've just said, where you live in the UK, age, how old someone is, someone's social class, and someone's stated gender. And language also varies according to context and interlocutor. So if I'm doing like a talk at a conference, I might make my accent sound less Yorkshire and more standard and more closer to standard English, to try and be perceived as more like educated and more understandable to like a wider audience. But if I'm like in the pub with my friends, then my Yorkshire accent will be like really strong. So depending on the context, the way that we speak and the type of dialect and accent that we use in our language can change quite dramatically. And I wanted to introduce you all to William Levoff, who is a professor of linguistics, and he's kind of seen as like the grandfather of linguistics, one of the founders of a lot of this theory. And he did some really interesting studies, and I've like put the main two on here, which I think are like the most noted, about looking at linguistic variation and some of this like socially stratified variation that I've just been talking about. So there was research done in New York City about something called rhoticity, which is like, you don't get this much in the UK. There's not much rhoticity in the way that we use language, but in America, people might say like car with like a r, whereas in the UK it's car. We don't pronounce the R, but the pronunciation of that R sound is called rhoticity. And in New York, Levoff found that using this rhoticity in speech is a symbol of social status. So if he asked people to speak in a really formal speech style, then they'd use rhoticity to try and elevate the social status and sound more formal. And another study that he did that was really interesting was looking at language and social identity. So he went to Martha's Vineyard. I don't know the correct way to pronounce that, but whatever it is, we'll go with that. And he looked at local dialect features and how they were used by people on the island. And he found that local natives of the island, particularly young males, would use features that were very local and very typical of that area in order to like distance themselves from tourists, because the kind of attitude towards tourists was, oh, tourists are just like coming over here in the summer and like using the island for like holidays and stuff, but we're the locals and we're the natives and this is like our territory. And they use the linguistic variation like tactfully in order to like demonstrate that they were locals and their local identity was like really important. So the attitudes that people have towards language and towards different people that use different variations of language can have like a real impact on linguistic choice for individuals. So this leads to a lot of social bias and stereotypes when we hear different people using different features of language. And I've put this picture up of Sean Bean and some Yorkshire puddings and some Yorkshire tea, because a lot of the stereotypes that people have when they hear a Yorkshire accent like mine is things like this, like the countryside, the Tour de Yorkshire, all this kind of stuff. And when you hear me speak right now, you might be making like subconscious assumptions about what I'm like and who I am just based upon the way that I'm talking and the language that I'm using when I'm explaining this stuff to you. And anybody who's got a real ear for linguistic variation might be able to pick up on the Scouse in my accent as well. I spent 4 years living in Liverpool, and I get told that I've got a Scouse twang. And every time you meet someone, you probably make like assumptions on where they're from and what they're like, just based upon the sounds that you hear in the voice and the words that they use that might be like typical of a particular place or a particular type of person. So how is this useful? Well, basically, so language is used to frame identities. And there's a theory in linguistics called Accommodation Theory, which says that people often choose, if they're speaking to someone from their local community who has like a similar style of language, they'll go more broader into that dialect or that variety of English or whatever language or dialect it is, in order to show like solidarity with that other person and like a common understanding. And it can work both ways. Like there can also be instances where you're talking to someone from outside of the community and you're using local language features to like ostracize someone else. So accommodation theory can like work both ways, and people can make linguistic choices in interactions with others to kind of like show like solidarity or to show distance. And there's also an interesting theory in linguistics about regional varieties, and it's called the proximity effect, which tells us that people that have accents similar to our own, we tend to regard them like more favourably and trust them more. And yeah, there's a huge like thing with solidarity there, and also like it can be explained in terms of like intelligibility of language and being able to understand a dialect. Like growing up in Yorkshire, I can hear the difference between someone that comes from Leeds and someone that comes from Hull or York, and I have like assumptions on these people based upon the fact that I can make these distinctions. But for someone that hasn't grown up in Yorkshire, they don't have that same grasp of like understanding of the differences between these dialects. And it works like internationally as well. So yeah, like someone from abroad might not be able to distinguish a Yorkshire accent from, say, a Scouse accent or a London accent. They might just think like it all sounds British. So yeah, there's an effect there based upon like your familiarity with a language and a region in which it's spoken. So language and place is really important, and the place that someone comes from can have like a massive effect on the way they use language, and whether or not they use the language of the local area can connect them to people or ostracize them from a particular group or a local area. And in this sense, people use language to perform local identity. And often this can be like in opposition of the mainstream. So you might get people in some of like the northern cities in the UK that like really hold on to their own regional dialect because they want to be seen as someone from Sheffield or a Scouser or a Geordie, and they don't want to be, they want to be recognised as such. And I've thrown a picture of the Arctic Monkeys up there because there's some research into the music of Arctic Monkeys. I don't know how many people are familiar with Arctic Monkeys songs, but a lot of their earlier stuff especially has got plenty of local references and uses of like local Sheffield dialect, like Na then Mardy Bum, and you know, all this kind of like stuff that's that's used amongst the people of Sheffield. And the research showed that they were doing this as like an act of identity, and they were trying to oppose like the mainstream music industry at the time, in which like lots of bands was like singing in like American accents because they were a big influence from the States on British music. So in like indie music, you get bands that will like use local dialect to try and like frame themselves as alternative and as like proud of the local regions. And yeah, this means that people who use the same linguistic repertoire will have like a feeling of affinity with other people that have the same features. And this has also led to something that we call commodification, because language and place is so like connected now that you can go to cities around the UK, and this happens elsewhere in the world as well, where you can go into like souvenir shops and buy cups like this one that says "Keep this end calm, it'll be right," which is like it's like a Sheffield variation of "keep calm and carry on" kind of thing. And yeah, you can get stuff like this in Sheffield because people here like really hold on to local language variation, and they're proud of the way that they speak, and they want to buy things that have it on, I guess. And this just shows how like important language variation is to people in areas where linguistic variation is really like salient and really noticeable, and places where you'd go there and instantly be able to recognise that somebody's a local from the dialect. And I put the periodic table of Sheffield dialect up there because I just love it. So yeah, so what comes with a lot of these social biases and assumptions about language is often some negative perceptions of people that have dialect, and something that in linguistics we call accentism or accent bias. And also it can be like opened up to like language prejudice, broadly speaking, where somebody's regarded as like less intelligent or less trustworthy or less of merit for like a particular job or to move into a particular house. So there's loads of studies that have been done looking at occasions in which people have tried to get jobs or tried to view a house, and because they've got a particular accent, which might be regional or it might be an accent from abroad, then it impacts, it has like real world implications on individuals, because they sometimes face prejudice because of their accent. And I really recommend for anyone that's interested in looking into this stuff more, accentbiasbritain.org. Some sociolinguistics are doing like research on this currently, trying to figure out like ways to prevent accent prejudice, because it's seen now as like one of the few forms of prejudice that's still normalised and accepted in society. And this often stems from classism, and this all emerged in round about the 1800s. There was a real push from London to standardise language and grammar in the UK. So loads of grammar books were made, and the kind of upper class and educated speakers in the South were trying to enforce standard English on lots of different areas in the UK, because it was seen as a negative thing to have a working class regional accent in like areas of the north where there was high levels of deprivation and unemployment. And yeah, it was seen as, you don't want to be having a Yorkshire accent because you'll seem like someone who's working class and deprived. And yeah, the accents that tend to be stigmatized are rural accents and urban accents. So I've put here like the example of the farmer accent. Like if a lot of people, when they hear someone who comes from a rural area in the UK, like the southwest, for instance, they'll say, "Oh, this person sounds like a farmer," and it's like these kind of discourses can like ostracize different people in society because of the way they speak and the fact that the language is less accepted than other forms of language, socially speaking. And yeah, this is seen like to us in sociolinguistics as really problematic, and there's like a real effort to try and spread the word about accentism. And yeah, I wanted to bring this up because I think it's important for us all to like keep in mind. And I put these pictures at the bottom. Because you hear people say stuff like, "Oh, I'm not talking properly. I'm not even speaking English today. Like I can't." Like this whole thing, keep calm and talk properly, and then the face palm is always like how I feel inside when I hear it, because I think what is properly, like what is regarded as proper language in society is just a social construct that's being kind of like imposed on us through like history, and it's ultimately like rooted in classism. So yeah, I think that's important to keep in mind in regards to the language that we're using and that we're hearing, and that like we're choosing to represent us. Like we need to not be prejudiced against any different type of language variety. And now I'm going to talk a little bit about how these sort of regional features of language are used in marketing. And I've got some examples up here of things that I've seen around Sheffield. And you're probably noticing me reference Sheffield a lot, but my research is into variation in Sheffield, so it's what I know. So I'm sticking to what I know, but a lot of this thing happens like widely across the globe. Like in a lot of places, you'll see companies going into local communities and kind of doing research on things that resonate with locals and things that people say, and then utilising it in marketing campaigns. So my friend Matt a sign that he saw in IKEA saying it's going to look really good, and "ray" is the way that Sheffielders pronounce "right." So this was obviously something that was like put there to speak to locals and, you know, like utilize local language in their store. And yeah, HSBC did a campaign, and these kind of adverts were seen all around the UK, where they looked at things that mattered to people in these local areas and made adverts about it. So you can see all the references in this one in Sheffield to, you know, like football, the Steel City, Henderson's Relish, beer, Arctic Monkeys, all this kind of stuff. But I have seen a HSBC advert that was put out by XR Sheffield that I prefer a lot more because I think this is a lot more reflective of HSBC, but there we go. Also, in terms of social media, this is something that I've been noticing a lot over the pandemic, about people asking consumers to support local, and in doing so utilising like local language features to try and get local people on board to their product or their service or their restaurant or their bar. And these are two examples in Sheffield of a pub called the Milona's Arms that put this post up saying it's going to be great, and it's kind of like a hope-based communication tool but like using regional accent features, and it's kind of like trying to draw in locals, and by speaking the language that we use, and also Saucy is like a vegan type like chicken wings, chicken burgers restaurant that's popped up, and they put in one of their captions of a post, "Sunday night tea, Sheffield." And in Sheffield, we say breakfast, dinner, tea, as opposed to breakfast, lunch, dinner. So they're kind of like using the local lingo to try and like appeal to locals and get them to like support a local business. So I think this is like evidence that there's a lot of value in using like the speech of local communities in order to get people on board with what you're trying to do. And I've put this video in because I love it, of the Yorkshire Tea Advert, and I don't know if you're going to be able to hear this if I play it, so let's try. Can you hear it?
No, I can't hear it.
Oh, that's a shame. Basically, in this advert, some of you might have already seen it. There's Sean Bean's in the advert, and he has a really broad Sheffield accent, and it's kind of used as, I guess you could say, a marketing tool to try and represent like Yorkshire people and try and like glamorize it in the sense of like, oh, buy Yorkshire tea, like it's for like proper Yorkshire folk and stuff like that. And the point that I'm like making with this is that, yeah, it's really valuable to have speakers that have like broad accents in these kind of like campaigns and stuff, and it's something that we can like take on board and think about in like the messengers that we're using in our campaigns and the people that are speaking on behalf of our messages, and who they might who in our audience would be able to resonate with like particular messengers. And here is like some more examples of messengers that have regional accents and connections with local areas. So I've put up there Angela Rayner, who is a Labour MP in the UK, who was born and raised in Stockport, which is part of Greater Manchester. And she has like a really broad Mancunian accent, for which she's actually like faced a lot of criticism by people in like the public eye, because people hear her accent and think, oh, she sounds like stupid, she's being called thick and like things like this, which like mean that people see her as uneducated because of the accent that she has, which is a real shame. But the fact that she has this accent, it makes her like a voice for people in Manchester and people in a local community, and means that like she's able to like mobilize people with her messaging and with her story, and people can relate to her, as opposed to someone that has like a really RP accent in politics, and people can't often relate to that. And I also put Andy Burnham on there, who's the mayor of Manchester. And that's a picture of him joining the school strikes that happened last year, the climate strikes, and the children that you can see in the background were all off school protesting, and he went to support them. But Andy Burnham's someone else that's like a real voice for, I guess, like people in the north, because he doesn't talk like your typical like MP that has like an RP accent, like the kind of accent that like Boris Johnson has, and you know, like the MPs that went to Eton and stuff like that. Like he's someone that like Northerners and people in the Northwest in particular can resonate to, because he was born and raised in the Northwest. And then also I've put Majid there, who was the mayor of Sheffield, and an MEP for the Green Party. And he like also has a really powerful story. I've got I don't know where the book is. Yeah, I've actually got his book, The Art of Disruption, a manifesto for real change, which I would highly recommend. And this is in his book, he tells his story about coming to the UK as a child, as a Somalian-born refugee, and his family moved to a community in Sheffield. And like yeah, just joined the local community and like integrated, and he now like speaks with a Sheffield accent, and yeah, it's like a real icon in Sheffield, because he really represents like the multicultural like nature of our city, and like how accepting people are, and and he comes from like an unlikely background to get into politics, but against all odds he got into politics, and now he speaks on behalf of people that, like in his book he talks about like anyone that wants to make change can make change. Like it don't matter what you sound like, what you look like, where you come from. Like if you have like passion and fight, then you can get places and you can make a change. And I think like these people are not only like really great messengers, but they have really like powerful stories. And I think, yeah, people telling the stories in that way and talking to communities that can resonate with their like lives and the things that they've gone through, it makes the message like even more powerful. So yeah, he's talked a lot about like the climate emergency and trying to mobilize young people to fight for our future. And yeah, he's really great. And now I'll just mention some research that I've been looking at in preparation for this talk about the use of language in public health campaigns. And yeah, the first key example that I came across is some people in the UK might already be familiar with the Change for Life campaign, which probably was at its peak about a decade ago. And there were loads of like adverts and stuff put out about people changing the lifestyle and eating 5 fruit and veg a day, and like adopting more healthy habits and exercise and stuff in order to like live longer. But this campaign, the way that this campaign was styled, and style is really important in campaigns, like the kind of like angle that you take in framing your message. The style was it basically used the voices of people from communities in like the north of England that are like urban and working class, and where there's like social deprivation. And I was reading like an interesting paper which kind of frames this as quite problematic, because the whole campaign were about individual change and putting the responsibility on individuals to like improve their own lives. But a lot of the people whose voices were being represented in this campaign weren't in a position to be able to have the resources to do a lot of the things that it suggested. And it was quite problematic in the way that it framed a lot of people from like the communities in which like the speakers came from as like contributing to the obesity pandemic by being like lazy and not making like healthy lifestyle choices. So this is kind of an example of a campaign which used like regional linguistic variation, but not necessarily in the best way. But like the things that we can take from this is looking at how style has been used in a campaign and into like public health. So looking at like the representation of linguistic features, including like voice, style, accent and intonation, register, metaphors, gestures and stance. And they also use the voices of children a lot, and the government was using this as a tool to like hide power and like put out a dialogue between equals, so that it was less like something being enforced on people and more like, oh, this is somebody else of your like demographic talking about something that you can relate to. And yeah, that's like a strategy that had been used with regional linguistic variation. There was also a campaign that was done, a public health campaign to stop smokeless tobacco, and this is something that's like really popular in parts of India. I know like elsewhere in like globally the main like thing with tobacco is like smoking and like stop smoking campaigns and stuff. But this example shows that like uniform, like umbrella messaging like that isn't always that impactful, because sometimes like different communities have different things that are relevant to them. And this was an example of a community where messaging needed to be targeted more towards this type of substance use. And the research was done in low and middle income countries, where there wasn't many resources for campaigns to be like built and made about this kind of stuff to try and stop people from using smokeless tobacco. And the approach that they took was to make messaging more like culturally relevant to the cultures in which this was prominent, by getting members of communities in which the messaging needed to target to like talk about stories of using smokeless tobacco and then like having issues, and like telling their stories in a way that people in their local communities could resonate to and think, oh yeah, like this is a true story of somebody like me who like faced a lot of trouble and a lot of issues from like this behavior. And it's difficult to ignore like somebody similar to you saying that, and like you can kind of resonate with it more and think, oh, this is something that could impact me as well. So this was like an example of like some research which shows that using messages that resonate culturally and are like personalized to cultural behaviors are really impactful. And also like where there was a lack of resources, they just did like videos of like people telling stories and then put that out. And that's something that can be like easily done today in like the age of technology if we have it. And it doesn't have to like cost too much money to make like a campaign like this, and it can still have a positive effect. And now I'll just quickly talk about language in political campaigns, because this is something that's quite big at the minute. So I've been looking at some research into the use of like simple campaign messaging and using simple language to try and address what's termed here as like the common people or like the everyday public. And there's like what the research is telling us is that like populist parties and parties that are like on the far right, like UKIP, are kind of like using language like this in order to win campaigns and like doing it quite effectively. Like obviously we had Brexit last year and Brexit got voted in, and a lot of it is like down to the way that these campaigns were framed and the audiences that were being targeted through language. And yeah, like there's like criticism of like the more mainstream parties for using language that's not accessible to everyday people, and people's understanding of like policies is impacted quite a lot by the accessibility of the messages and the kind of like policies that are being put out and the language that's being used in like political like propaganda and stuff. So yeah, an example is UKIP during the Brexit campaign, Donald Trump's run for presidency in the US, and the recent presidential race between the Front National and the Republicans in France. And there's like an overarching similarity in all these cases that the rise of populist mobilization is challenging mainstream politics, and a lot of it is to do with like the language and the messaging that's being put out and how accessible it is. And it kind of illustrates the need to put out more simple campaign messaging. So yeah, that's something to bear in mind. And there was a really good example of a campaign that was put out by the Italian government, where they use what we could call like simple campaign messaging, which had the language of everyday people and dialect in it. So this advert that you can see here has got like language in there from a northern dialect in Italy. And this was kind of used as a tactic by the government in order to demonstrate like integration of migrants, because the images in the adverts are migrant workers, and then the text is dialect. So it's kind of demonstrating that immigrants are being more accepted and received in society through linguistic integration. So like it shows how powerful language is in campaigns, because using this is kind of like demonstrates that the like identity that dialect can give to someone if they've got like a grasp of a local like salient like feature of language, which is like represented in this poster. And this also like made the campaign really resonate with locals as well as migrants, because obviously locals have a real grasp of this language, and it makes the government look like they're like speaking on behalf of the people, and using the language of like the wider public. And now I've like talked about all this stuff, I just wanted to plug some working groups that we've got in messaging at the minute. And if you've been to the messaging workshops before, you will have heard about these groups. But one group in particular, which Adam and I are involved in, is Interconnecting Local Communities and Frame Bridging. And in this working group, we're basically using this kind of research that I've been explaining to come up with regional messaging for animal rebellion, and think about like ways that we can vary our messaging in particular places to resonate to different people, and using like frame bridging, so finding out what's important to the people in that community in regards to animal agriculture or the climate crisis, and kind of like showing them that their frame of like reference and importance is like shared with ours and with our like common beliefs and the things that we care about. So I just wanted to let everyone know that that's happening, and if anyone is interested in joining our working group or any of the others, like you can get in touch with us and we can speak more about that, and we can further work on like having conversations about messaging and talking about how we can strengthen it and how we can further mobilize members of the public. So and these are thoughts that I've been having about how everything I've just mentioned can be utilized in our movement, and this is kind of like an ongoing thought process, what I'm still working on, but so far like a few of the ideas are improving mobilization, broadly speaking, by like onboarding more people to our messaging and to our aims, and increasing like public consciousness and understanding of anti-speciesism, and like a plant-based food system and system change and all this kind of stuff, by having messengers that belong to local communities and can speak their language and can tell stories that can resonate with people in the local areas. And with this, like we can think of like ideas for regional messaging. So like, for instance, the things that I put up there before about Sheffield, and how all the hospitality industry have been like #support local, #it'll be right, using like features from Sheffield dialect in social media to reach out to local people. This is something that we could work with, like maybe with local groups and people that have like teams in specific localities that are trying to like recruit more people into their local groups and spread the message to more people in the local area. They can utilize a lot of this knowledge about regional messaging and its effectiveness, and use it in like social media posts, for instance. And also, just having an understanding of a lot of this theory is good to think about things like accommodation and proximity effect, and to understand like the language that we're using, like who's going to resonate to it and who will be able to like understand the things we're saying. And a lot of the time things like anti-speciesism and momentum driven organizing and mobilization and all these like terms that we like use freely because we all have like a solid grasp and understanding of what they mean. There's a lot of people who like won't have come across these concepts before. So we're kind of like othering a lot of people and ostracizing a lot of people by using language that doesn't resonate with them. So a lot of it is about like thinking about other ways that we can put this stuff across and get people that live in local communities to talk about it in their own terms. And yeah, also just paying more attention to like knowing who our audiences are. And obviously there's lots of different answers to knowing who our audience is, because our audience is like a lot of different types of people, and our messaging needs to reflect that, in that it needs to be effective and like speaking to different people from different like social demographics. And I'll hand over to Adam now for our activity, and then we'll come back for a discussion and a Q&A if anyone has any questions. Adam, you're muted.
So is always the way. Yeah, that was all really good. So thanks so much. I'll let you have a breather, and of course we can't let you go without doing a few breakout rooms. So we're going to do a self-critical workshop. We're going to look at some of the language we use in Animal Rebellion, and then maybe think about how we can make it better or more accessible or more tailored towards a particular locality or towards a particular group. So it could be how you would use the messaging in your local area, or it could be within your friendship group, all of those sorts of things. Yeah, I think it's everyone back. So I hope you had some interesting things to say. Obviously, I mean, it's quite a new thing. If you've never done anything like this before, like, you know, we'd love to hear what people thought about various things. Words didn't like, or, you know, thought could be more clear. We'd love to hear them, and maybe it'll trickle through messaging streamed into the guidelines, that sort of stuff. So if anyone from any of the groups wants to, from any point, anything they found which could be better targeted in a local area, or just more generally, yeah, let's hear from some people. I guess we can do it group by group, or you can sing out if you have any particular yearning to. I think group one was the group with Jam. Did you have any interesting things you found?
Yeah, I think so. So we chose the third one, which is we need a regenerative culture. So the first thing that came up was that people might not really understand what regenerative means. And then also in farming areas, people might associate that with regenerative farming. And then then on the word culture, so as like Joe mentioned, where in certain places where people are really true to their culture and really sort of have a lot of solidarity and stuff with their own culture, might see that as sort of a bit of like a threat that we need to change our culture, shift to another culture, right? So so what we did was we took the culture and said building on our culture to make it healthier, kinder, more resilient and adaptable.
Yeah, that's really good. And do you think about any particular? I mean, a lot of you in there. You think about any particular locality, or is that more of just a general?
I know it's more general because yeah, we just couldn't choose. We had people from literally all over the world, like spanned across continents. So
Yeah, we thought that might happen. Not to worry, to think about. Is there anyone else from that group who had another point? No, then we'll go straight on to the second group.
Well, I was just going to say quickly, I was in that group and we had kinder was one of the building our culture to make it healthier, kinder, more resilient and adaptable.
Yes, she's a little bit.
Yeah, very good stuff. And then, were there any thoughts in group 2? Which there were just 3 of you, I think. I popped into all of them. There were people definitely thinking about things. I think group 2 was Madeline and Elizabeth, and then someone else. Obviously, if the point's already been covered, then you know.
Were we group 2? I don't know. We talked about the word mitigation, and we talked a little bit about citizens' assemblies and people's assemblies with regards to mitigating power. But some people weren't clear about what mitigation meant. That was the only kind of target that we didn't fully understand.
Yeah, I think that's a really good one. Yeah, mitigations. You know, a lot of these words are quite abstract and jargony, I find. And yeah, do you think about any particular angles to rephrase it at, or just the issues with the word?
No, I'm really sorry. We didn't think of a way of improving it. That would have been helpful.
No, not to worry. It's all good. And Georgia, were you in that group as well? I know you put the message in the chat, which maybe joking copy of about the balance between, you know, yeah, just making sure that the language is balanced well. And then group 3, I think Rosie's gonna see this one.
Yeah, so we looked at the first principle. We are an anti-speciesist movement with a shared vision of change. We felt a lot of people might not know what anti-speciesist means, so we thought about changing it to we are a movement fighting for all species, possibly with a shared vision of change. We didn't adjust the last bit.
Yeah, I think that's pretty good. Everyone sort of picked up on these very jargony words that we sometimes, you know, we use because they can be quite precise, but at the same time, they don't mean things to people. They lack a lot of you know, a lot of clarity. But in fact, they are so abstract and sophisticated, in one way of saying. Yeah, so that's really interesting. Everyone sort of picked up on sort of the similar problems that we have, and maybe, yeah, I hope it's been an interesting thing to do, to think about how the language we use potentially has, you know, could be more clear, or could be more targeted, and obviously how we work from what we have to make it better. And then I think Joey and I are going to do some sort of nice wrapping up chat.
Thank you, Adam. Yeah, and thank you everyone for getting involved in these discussions and having these conversations. I think it's really great. And I just wanted to mention as well that there's actually a consultation process going on at the minute, like in relation to principles and values, and like the language that's being used on that. So yeah, there might be some interesting stuff coming out about that, and like asking people in more depth what their opinions are of the principles and values and what needs to change. So it's good for us to be like thinking about this. And now I'll just wrap things up. So yeah, I guess the key things that I want people to take away from what we've discussed is just being more aware of the social power of the language that we use, the way we use it, like our voices, who our messengers are, making our messages more targeted to local communities where needs be is really important, and it's something that people can think about maybe in local groups, and when they're putting out doing actions in particular communities that like impact different people in different ways. Also like the kind of research on campaigns in like a political realm and in like a public health realm and stuff, I think we can take learnings from, in that we need to keep a lot of the jargon and stuff that we're using quite simple and have it so that it's like led by science, so people can trust what we're saying, and but also put it across to them in ways that will resonate with them and in ways that they can understand. And also the stuff that I started off with, talking about like localism in linguistics and how people really like connect with language and place and local linguistic identity. And that's something that we need to be really aware of, and we need to it's something that we can utilize in our messaging by taking on pieces of local language that resonate with people and using them to our advantage. And so I briefly mentioned before a working group that we have in messaging, which is looking at all this kind of stuff in more detail, and we'll hopefully be having our first meeting soon and thinking about practical ways that we can start to implement some of this stuff. So if anybody is at all interested in joining that group, then please do like get in touch with us and let us know, and we'll be really happy to have you. The more the better. So and if anybody wants support with any of this stuff, like maybe you're in a local group and you want to put out some messaging to members of your local community, then just get in touch with us. We've got a messaging channel on Mattermost, which you can put requests in, asking for help and support, and then we'll be able to reach out with you and have a conversation and talk about this stuff. We've had a messaging team now since October, and it's been growing. We've got 6 people in our like core messaging team now, and like loads more in our 4 working groups who are doing some amazing work. So keep coming to messaging trainings. We're working hard on putting some resources together, and we'll be able to put some resources together on the back of this workshop as well about like the importance of linguistics. And I'm going to put together a handout with like the key takeaways and the key applications for our movement, what people can use to refer to. And I also just wanted to mention as well, if anybody would be interested in like knowing more about the research which I'm referring to and having like references and stuff, then I'd be happy to put together like a bibliography of the sources that I've been referring to, if anybody wants to read any of that research in any more depth and use it in your activism. So yeah, and thank you everyone for coming. I'm really grateful to have had the opportunity to talk about all this stuff, and yeah, hopefully provide some helpful information on how this can help our messaging, and yeah, and reach our aims, I guess. So thank you everyone. And if anybody has any questions or things that they want to bring up and discuss, like, now is the time. And if not, feel free to have a nice evening.